I still remember the sound the paper made when my mother slid it across the wedding table. It wasn't loud, but in a ballroom filled with 300 smiling guests, clinking glasses, and soft violin music, it somehow silenced everything. At my wedding, my parents handed me a $240,000 invoice for the cost of raising you, my father announced with a proud smile, raising his champagne glass, as if he were delivering a heartfelt toast instead of a public execution. Nervous laughter rippled through the room until people realized he wasn't joking. I looked down. Every page was itemized. Hospital bills, school tuition, birthday presents, food, electricity, even the rent for the bedroom I'd slept in as a child. At the bottom, in bold letters, were the words, "Total due, $240,000, payment expected today." My new wife reached for my hand beneath the table. Her fingers trembled. Around us, phones slowly appeared. Whispers spread across the ballroom like wildfire. My cousins avoided my eyes. My college friends stared in disbelief. Even the wedding photographer lowered his camera, unsure whether he was witnessing a celebration or a family collapse. My mother leaned closer with the same sweet smile she'd worn my entire life. "We sacrificed everything for you," she whispered. "Now you're successful. It's time you repay your debt." The room waited for me to break. For years, my parents had turned every achievement into another bill I supposedly owed them. Every birthday came with a reminder of how expensive I'd been. Every graduation was followed by stories about their sacrifices. Love had always arrived with a receipt attached. They thought this was the final payment. They didn't know I'd brought an envelope of my own. It had remained sealed in the inside pocket of my tuxedo since that morning. Inside wasn't money. It was something far more valuable, the truth they had spent my entire life trying to bury. My name is Daniel, and for as long as I can remember, my parents treated love like a business transaction. They never yelled without reminding me how much I cost. If I needed new shoes, I heard about the sacrifice for months. If I earned straight A's, they congratulated themselves before they congratulated me. I learned early that every act of kindness came with invisible interest attached. My younger sister lived in a different world. She was celebrated simply for existing, while I was expected to earn every smile and apologize for every expense. When relatives complimented my grades or work ethic, my parents quickly reminded everyone that none of it would have been possible without their financial sacrifices. My accomplishments became proof of their parenting instead of my perseverance. After college, I built my own career from the ground up. I worked impossible hours, saved every bonus, and quietly invested instead of chasing status. As my life improved, my parents became strangely interested in my income, but rarely asked if I was happy. Every holiday dinner ended with jokes about how I owed them for everything they'd done. I laughed along because arguing never changed anything. Silence became my shield, patience my habit. They mistook my restraint for weakness and my respect for obedience. What they never realized was that I had stopped believing their version of our family's history years ago. I had simply been waiting for the right moment. One where the truth could never be denied or explained away. The weeks leading up to the wedding felt strangely rehearsed, as though my parents were performing roles only they understood. Every planning meeting became another opportunity to remind everyone how generous they had been throughout my life. They offered opinions on everything: the venue, the flowers, the guest list, but never once asked what my fiancé and I actually wanted. Whenever we met with vendors, my father found quiet ways to diminish me. He would smile politely before saying, "Daniel has expensive taste. He's always been good at spending other people's money." The coordinators usually laughed, assuming it was harmless family humor. I smiled too, even though I knew exactly what he was doing. My mother had her own method. She loved telling relatives stories about my childhood, carefully choosing the ones that made me sound helpless or ungrateful. If someone praised my career, she'd tilt her head and reply, "Well, none of it would exist without everything we invested in him." She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her calm certainty carried more weight than anger ever could. My wife noticed the pattern long before anyone else. During one tasting, she squeezed my arm beneath the table after my parents exchanged another knowing glance. They weren't celebrating our marriage. They were preparing an audience. By then, I had already received the envelope that would change everything. It stayed locked in my desk at home, untouched, but never forgotten. Every quiet insult convinced me that waiting was the right choice. Revenge didn't need volume. It only needed perfect timing. The turning point didn't happen at the wedding. It happened 6 weeks earlier, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, when I received a certified envelope from the attorney who had handled my late grandfather's estate. Inside was a handwritten letter and copies of documents my grandfather had kept for decades. He had written only one sentence at the top. You deserve to know why I always told you to trust facts, not family stories. I spent the next 3 hours reading every page. There were cancelled checks showing that my college tuition hadn't been paid by my parents at all. It had come from a trust my grandfather secretly established before I was born. There were receipts proving he had covered my medical bills, my first car, and even part of the down payment on my first apartment after college. Then I reached the final document. It was a notarized agreement bearing both of my parents' signatures. Years earlier, they had accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars from my grandfather to help raise me after my biological mother passed away. In return, they had promised never to burden me with financial claims or reveal the arrangement until he decided the time was right. Instead, they had spent my entire life convincing me that every dollar came from their own sacrifice. I didn't feel angry. I felt something colder. The invoice they planned to hand me at my wedding suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't asking to be repaid for raising me. They were trying to collect twice for the same life. At that moment, I stopped wondering whether I should confront them. The only question left was when. The wedding would give them exactly what they wanted, an audience. It would also give me one. Before I made a single move, I verified every document. My grandfather had taught me that truth only matters if it can withstand scrutiny. I contacted the attorney who had managed his estate and asked one question. If this is challenged, will it hold up? His answer came without hesitation. Every letter, bank transfer, trust record, and notarized agreement had been preserved exactly as the law required. I didn't threaten my parents. I didn't hint that I knew anything. Instead, I let them continue believing they controlled the story. Every phone call about the wedding sounded normal. My mother happily discussed seating arrangements, while my father joked that marriage was finally making me financially responsible. I simply listened. The attorney suggested creating certified copies of the documents, rather than risking the originals. We organized everything in chronological order, making the timeline impossible to dispute. At the very end, I placed my grandfather's handwritten letter. It wasn't the strongest legal evidence, but it explained the human reason behind every document that came before it. The envelope stayed in the inside pocket of my tuxedo from the morning of the ceremony. I never touched it during the vows, the photographs, or the reception. There was no need to rush. My parents believed they had spent months preparing the perfect public humiliation. What they never considered was that I had spent weeks preparing something far more powerful. Not revenge built on anger, justice built on undeniable facts, delivered at exactly the moment their performance reached its final act. I read their invoice from beginning to end without interrupting them. When I reached the final line, I folded the papers neatly, placed them back on the table, and took a slow sip of water. The silence unsettled them more than any argument could have. My father cleared his throat. "Well?" he asked, confident that the audience was on his side. I reached into my tuxedo, removed the sealed envelope, and slid it across the table toward him. "I think," I said quietly, "you should read this first." The ballroom remained silent except for the faint clink of silverware somewhere in the back of the room. My father opened the envelope with the same confidence he had worn all evening. The first few pages barely changed his expression. Then he reached the notarized agreement. His smile disappeared. My mother leaned closer, trying to follow the words. Within seconds, the color drained from her face. She grabbed the papers with trembling hands, flipping through the bank records, trust documents, and my grandfather's letter. Neither of them spoke. Guests nearby began exchanging confused glances. A few relatives who recognized my grandfather's signature quietly stood and moved closer. One of my uncles whispered, "Those are real." I finally broke the silence. "So, if Grandpa paid for my upbringing years ago, and you accepted that money under a signed agreement, what exactly is this invoice charging me for?" No one answered. The ballroom didn't erupt into chaos. It didn't need to. The truth had entered the room, and every excuse quietly walked out. For several long seconds, no one moved. The room that had been filled with laughter only moments. Earlier now carried the heavy silence that follows an undeniable truth. My parents sat frozen, still staring at the documents as though reading them again might somehow change what they said. Then the whispers began. Relatives who had spent years praising my parents for their sacrifices looked at one another with quiet disbelief. A few remembered my grandfather's generosity and slowly realized why he had always insisted on paying for certain things himself. The pieces fit together in front of everyone. My aunt finally broke the silence. She looked at my parents, not at me, and softly asked, "Why would you do this to your own son?" Neither of them answered. Several guests walked over to congratulate my wife and me, carefully ignoring the invoice still lying on the table. Their kindness wasn't dramatic, it was respectful, and somehow that meant more than any public defense could have. Within days, the story spread through the family. My parents' reputation didn't collapse because I attacked them. It collapsed because the facts spoke louder than their years of carefully crafted stories. Trust, once lost, proved impossible to invoice back. As for me, I realized something important. The greatest damage they had caused wasn't financial. It was convincing me that love had to be earned through repayment. That illusion ended in a ballroom filled with witnesses. And once you stop believing you owe someone for simply existing, you become impossible to control. People often ask whether I regret exposing my parents on my wedding day. The honest answer is no, but not because it embarrassed them. I don't regret it because I finally stopped carrying a debt that never belonged to me. For years, I believed I had to earn the right to be loved. Every achievement felt like another payment toward an account that could never be settled. Looking back, I realized that was never my burden to carry. It was the story they needed me to believe, so I would never question them. My wife and I built our marriage on a different promise. We would never keep score. We would never turn kindness into currency or affection into obligation. If we were fortunate enough to have children someday, they would grow up knowing that a parent's responsibility is a gift, freely given, not a loan waiting to be collected. My parents reached out several times in the months that followed. Their messages spoke of misunderstanding, family reputation, and forgiveness. They never mentioned accountability. Until that changed, I chose distance over familiar disappointment. The envelope now rests in a safe beside my grandfather's letter. I rarely look at it anymore because I no longer need the proof. The documents exposed the truth to everyone else, but they also revealed something to me. Peace doesn't arrive the moment your enemies lose. It arrives the moment their lies stop defining who you are. And as I left that ballroom holding my wife's hand instead of their invoice, I realized the greatest inheritance my grandfather had given me wasn't the evidence. It was the freedom to walk into my future, owing no one an apology for simply being loved.